Autonomous DevTools, from Copilot to NoPilot. I'm Ray Myers. Welcome to my new channel. You may have also seen me on my previous channel, Craft vs. Cruft. I've been developing software professionally for about 15 years now. I've been a software engineering tech lead in 4 industries. I'm an expert in legacy code and site reliability. I started this channel because within AI, and specifically within AI coding tools, there have been some recent advances that I've talked to a lot of people who are really interested in following along and even contributing, and I'd like to make it a little easier to do that. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of what's been going on, who's been working on it. These are some places you can find me. I'm on LinkedIn, probably easiest way to actually get a hold of me. I have this channel, NoPilot. My previous channel, Craft vs. Cruft, will still be active as well. And I have a new podcast I'm starting with Andre Goulet called Empathy in Tech, which will also touch on AI, but of course is a little more human side as well. I have a couple websites here, Mender.ai, the legacy code AI-enabled strategy guide, and the first spin-off of that I've recently started, nopilot.dev, which is the same subject matter as this channel. So as this is all rapidly changing, that would be the place to get the latest information. Why are we here? Well, there's a lot of prologue before this that kind of enabled this and what happened after it. But a particular inciting event here was on March 12th of this year, 2024, Cognition Labs released this demo of a tool they called Devon. Now, the operative part of their announcement, in my opinion, was this. Devon is an autonomous agent that solves engineering tasks through the use of its own shell, code interpreter, and web browser. There were other things they announced, such as calling it the first AI software engineer. I disagree vehemently, actually, with that characterization. I realize it is simply marketing, but I don't think it is an AI software engineer in any meaningful sense, nor is it the first even thing of these approximate capabilities. I think it is the first one that has been distilled into a coherent product direction, and that is why it resonated. And this was a very important contribution. Nonetheless, this announcement rightly, I think, sent out a shockwave around the world, with thousands of developers scrambling to try to reproduce this result in open source. And what happened then was frankly spectacular to me to watch. So just 12 days into this, I released a video, We Can Beat Devon, which was a play on the Discord server, which at the time was called Can We Beat Devon? Some key predictions I made at that point was, if we were talking about beating Devon in the sense of humans versus machines, that's really just not even a contest right now. That is not the reasonable question to ask. We have advanced programming in many, many ways, and that is good. We should continue to try and do that. AI doesn't fundamentally change the reality of what we're trying to do, which is augment and not replace. I gave a couple timelines. I predicted for an open source tool to have a Devon-like experience, at least according to what we're seeing in the demo videos, that would be achieved in 2 to 4 months. And in particular, the benchmark performance Cognition reported, which was 14% on the SWE-bench benchmark by Princeton, I predicted that within 2 months. We assume that these open source tools will be using proprietary models such as those of Anthropic's or OpenAI's for now, just like we believe Cognition is doing. So some pretty aggressive timelines there, but what surprised even me was the open source community as well as the academic research community blew my predictions out of the water in a positive direction. In only 1 month, that benchmark score had been first achieved parity by SWE agent out of Princeton, and then beaten, at least in a past 3 run, by AutoCode Rover out of National University of Singapore. That criteria has been met. The latest version of OpenDevon, I think, is pretty close to a polished experience such as we see in the demos. So within the lower bound of that in the 2 months, as far as the first prediction, I think that has also been achieved. Now, I'm sure in the future, Cognition will release more impressive things. It's not really about beating this one particular line in the sand, right? It's about just multiple parties achieving progress in a direction, and us now talking about what that direction even should be. So if you want to see a little bit more about the current state of the board as I understand it, you can always go to nopilot.dev. Link from the front page is a leaderboard page. What's staggering here is these were all announced within 2 months of each other. I mean, work had been ongoing on them before that, but we went from having nothing that could perform on Swebench to any significant degree to having all of these different players. And the significance of the Swebench benchmark is that it is not one-off isolated coding tasks. It involves tasks that take place on an entire repository. It is a useful, albeit small task performed on the context of a real code base. So theoretically, if you can perform on that, you can be doing real work in the industry. I contend not the sort of work that replaces a software engineer, but certainly that is very helpful and valuable. You can see me breaking down the specifics of the Devon announcement in this video here, dissecting Devon. Basically, the TLDR here is this is a dev tool. It is a new kind of dev tool. It's very interesting. It's important that we get it right, but it is not a person, and it is not a replacement for a person. I go point by point in what was announced. The closer you get to the points that imply it might be a replacement for a person, the more it's a little sketchy about what's being said, let's say. But you can go there for details on that. So what are these things? Well, I would rule out calling them an AI software engineer. That implies all sorts of things which are absolutely not in play here. But we have coding assistants. Are these a new form of coding assistant? Yes, maybe. I think that there's a strong enough differentiator that we might want to use a different terminology, and I'll explain what I think the difference might be. But these are essentially the evolution of your coding assistants, such as GitHub Copilot, continue.dev, such as the cursor editor. So this more advanced form of assistant, one thing to call it is an agent. So within the AI space, agents are a pretty descriptive term for things that act with a little more autonomy, things that are able to kind of observe their environment across multiple actions and maybe backtrack when something goes wrong. It's not really a product name, it's more jargony, but it's a fine name. DevTools. So not very descriptive, but I think that is a very important way to describe what these things are. As they become of more than just academic interest, right, that we start to talk about them as though they're a polished product. One thing these are is a dev tool. We have expectations of what a dev tool is, what we want it to be able to do in our environment, what protections we have when we use them. That is why I happen to be calling these style of agents autonomous dev tools. It's just to imply that productized maturity that we would come to expect from anything in our workflow. Ultimately, though, I think this is a new form of automation. We've seen many similar things to this. I've been involved in the DevOps movement for a very long time. We have seen new forms of automation be absolute game changers if applied well. This may be a situation like that. It may be like the introduction, for instance, of configuration management. Tools like Puppet and Chef and Ansible and Terraform. When used well, these made a huge difference in our lives and the reliability we were able to achieve, how fast we're able to scale certain things. Could this be something of that magnitude or even greater? I think a lot of credible people are suggesting that. I recently appeared on John Willis's podcast talking about this. He was a DevOps pioneer who was involved in the creation of a lot of these kinds of automation. If you're watching, hi John, come on the channel sometime. Anyway, getting more into what I think the distinction is between an assistant and an agent very casually. We're still developing this, so let me know what your thoughts are, right? But I think an assistant that you might see in something like GitHub Copilot or Cursor or continue.dev, when you make one interaction with it, it tends to take at most one action, possibly call an LLM one time. An agent, on the other hand, operates at a higher level of abstraction. In response to one user action, it may take many actions and incorporate environment feedback as it goes forward. So specifically tools that are powered by LLMs, this often takes the form, for instance, of an assistant just calling an LLM one time and an agent calling an LLM many times, and again, acting in the environment and incorporating the feedback into that prompting process. And further, I would suggest as a subset of agent are autonomous dev tools, the term I'm introducing. And that is simply an agent that is suitable to use in a software development lifecycle. And it is a polished product. So the journey from all these agents, which we already have, to proper dev tools is, I think, the one to be focusing on right now. Now, I'd like to make a point, though, that this isn't necessarily agents versus assistants. I am pushing the focus on agents as a really promising direction, but that doesn't mean that if what you want is just sort of immediate human-in-the-loop feedback, that this is a dry direction for you. I believe that agent workflows, focusing on these, will drive better assistance because now we have these benchmarks that can measure whether our assistants are consistently choosing useful next steps. And now we can develop reusable components. The things that agents are doing, they can be dropped into, I think, superior assistance than we otherwise would have had. And part of the reason for that is that to have an agent really work well, you need to incorporate feedback from your environment. You need to incorporate really strong tool use. We already know that tool use can address many of the weaknesses of large language models. Something else I want to point out is that an autonomous dev tool doesn't just have to be a coding agent. As just one example, you have autonomous troubleshooters. Last year I did an interview with my friend Kyle Forster, who used to be the product director for Kubernetes at Google. He has a startup called Runwin, which has built a troubleshooting assistant for the Kubernetes ecosystem. It's mainly used as an assistant under the definition I gave, but I think it can run in a fully autonomous mode. And I think that's the direction a lot of these things will go. There are probably a number of other existing products that would fall into this bucket, and there will be more over time. Something else I want to touch on here is as we are crossing into practicality and not just, a coding exercise as we're studying LLM capabilities, we are stepping into the field of software engineering. If you don't like comparing it to traditional engineering, we can talk about that another time. But at minimum, it is a profession with a lot of real-world challenges at scale. The title of software engineer was first introduced, on the left you see Margaret Hamilton, who was the lead software engineer developing the flight software for the Apollo moon landing. And the reason she introduced that term was to secure professional respect for her colleagues and emphasize the discipline that they were developing that allowed them to implement that project successfully without catastrophic outcomes. For a more recent treatment of what we know now, I would really recommend Dave Farley's book, Modern Software Engineering. He also has a book called Continuous Delivery I quite like. And there are some other people that have other ideas. We are still building our understanding of how to do software engineering in the widest variety of contexts possible with the widest degree of success we can. But the point is that just sprinkling some AI into the mix does not eliminate the challenges or the disciplines that we've needed to develop. We have to think about how this fits responsibly in the loop. So that is something else I'd really like to focus on this channel. A word on open source. So we're predicting autonomous dev tools will become, you might say, essential infrastructure within the software toolchain. Everything that is essential infrastructure now, hand-waving a little bit about what that means, needs a strong open source offering, which exists in healthy competition with proprietary ones. Some examples of this, for instance, are compilers, databases, operating systems, config management tools. All of these things have strong open source entrants in that space, and they must continue to. It is simply in the collective interest of the industry for that to be the case. I think we'll eventually see autonomous dev tools join the ranks of that and be an indispensable part of the workflow. When I say open source, which means approximately the same thing as free software, it does mean a specific thing. There are 4 freedoms we're talking about, and they are all needed in order for the ecosystem to operate. There are 4 things you must be able to do. Freedom 0, use the program for any purpose. 1, distribute exact copies. 2, modify the program. 3, distribute the modified copies. So this is a subtle but important distinction. A source available license that does not respect the 4 freedoms does not operate with the ecosystem. So it is not properly referred to as open source. It is, if anything, source available. So when we develop an autonomous dev tool that is open source, if it relies on a proprietary model, the dev tool itself might be open source, But then we need to talk about, have we secured the complete supply chain of this if the model is just GPT-4 or Anthropic? And another important point about open source models is that most of the open source models, as they're referred to, are merely open weight models. The weights have been released. Maybe even the weights have been released with an open source compliant license, as is the case sometimes. But weights are not source. If you were to refer to a generative AI model as open source, what that would actually mean is not only are the weights available in an open source for freedoms license, but also the training data and the training process is as well. Not telling you not to use proprietary models. I use them. Just let's be clear on the terms. So we are here to follow and promote the development of high quality, open source, autonomous dev tools for the advancement of practical software engineering. What are we doing next? The next video up, which should be out right around now, is a paper reading of the SWE agent preprint. Honestly, I don't read as much academic literature as I should, but I really enjoyed this one. I feel like they have laid just a very important foundation to how these things can be constructed. I have 3 talks coming up, MentorCon and Artificially Intelligent Enterprise and CraftConf, all a little different, but all relating to AI and coding and what I've learned over the past year. Probably soon after on the channel, I'll be covering the agents Code Act, which is the new default agent in OpenDevon, and AutoCode Rover, and see what we can learn from those architectures, especially as it contrasts with the SWE agent. I think the fact that significant benchmark performance has been achieved in so many different ways is really interesting right now and probably indicates there's more yet to say. Thank you for joining us, and as Lao Tzu said in the Tao Te Ching, with patience, the most tangled cord may be undone. Thank you.